All right. So starting with new faces, I don't see any new ones, but I see a long time missing face. Emily, welcome back.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. It's good to see you all.
It's good to see you too. Let's see. Okay. And then I will share my screen and we can take a look at outstanding RFCs. Got a few here. The stack bomb RFC, I believe, is still blocked on upstream CNB decision making. Is that true?
Yeah.
All right. And then moving on, we've got support poetry in Paketo Python build pack.
Yeah, this is seems mostly done at this point. Ryan did leave some comments. Thank you for that. If anyone else has any comments on this, those would be greatly appreciated. I could also, run down quickly what's in here, seeing as this is the first time I think we brought it to the rest of the group. So essentially, poetry, for those who may not know, is a package management and dependency management tool for Python, akin to pip and van pip and the like. It's not currently supported in Python, so this RFC is just proposing what it would look like to add that support to Python, obviously. So the three build packs here, as you can see, would be a poetry build pack that would supply poetry itself, poetry install, which would run the process of installing the dependencies into a virtual environment within the working directory. The details of the technical details of that, I think we're still working out the final points. And then a poetry run build pack, which would just run whatever command they have listed in their pyproject.toml via that poetry run command. So that's the gist of it. There are some interesting, I guess, idiosyncrasies with poetry itself and the way it's installed that I go in. Yeah, I think they're covered in detail here, some of the choices that were made and the alternatives to those choices. So without getting too deep into the technicals, I'd invite you all to read through and see if you have any comments. Also welcome any questions now if you have them.
Awesome. Yeah, this looked very thoroughly investigated. I was happy to see all the detail that was in here. I think it'll help folks when they go to implement this to be much more productive. All right, moving on from there, we've got this RFC for secure runtime environments. Sam doesn't look like he's here this week. We went over this one last week. I think the gist of this is generally that there is upstream in the CNB project an RFC that allows stacks to specify different user IDs for build versus run. Paketo doesn't currently do this. We have the same user ID across build and run. Ultimately, what this means is that in a runtime image that's built from a build pack, parts of the running process can modify the file system. So like things like a profile D or exec-D script can modify the file system in ways that maybe present security concerns. So what's being asked of us here is that build packs effectively don't do any of that kind of like writing of the file system, specifically in kind of like the workspace or any of the build pack directories. And that if we do need to write files to the file system, that we use places conventionally that everyone should be able to write to, like the temp directory. I think Dan has some concerns about that. Apparently, it seems like it's not uncommon in virtualized environment for the temp directory to be mounted with like an especially small volume, in which case maybe we wouldn't be able to write very much stuff to that particular space on the file system. And then also it sounds like Dan was asking for just a little bit more detail as far as like, what are the steps for us to implement this? What are the things that Sam wants us to see? The idea being, how do we know when we're done, rather than just generally don't ever do this for anything in the future. So if you haven't taken a look, please do take a look. It's still open. And yeah, I think any feedback would be helpful.
Sorry, I still have to catch up on all of the things that are in flight. I'm assuming when we say we wouldn't write to other places other than like the temp directory, that would be at runtime. Right?
At runtime, yes, exactly.
Because otherwise that would be a different kind of problem.
Ideally, what this would allow us to do is at some point in the future, make it so that the build user actually has a different ID than the run user.
Yeah.
And if we were still writing to those common places like the workspace, obviously that would fail at runtime because the user IDs would change.
On the Java build pack, I know we moved to writing only to the temp directory because a lot of users were using a read-only container file system, and the only writable part of the file system was like a tempfs in the temp directory. So, and depending on how people have their Kubernetes configured, that can be like the default in some environments. So,
yeah, I don't think we had any for the build packs themselves, any technical concerns. I think one of the only places we actually do any writing of this is like the Nginx build pack at runtime will generate an Nginx conf file. Is it the Nginx build pack or is it the static file build pack? I can't remember, but one of those will like dynamically at runtime generate Nginx conf and it drops it in the workspace directory. But there's no reason that couldn't be moved to a temp directory. I think the other thing we were concerned about is like, if we were at some point in the future to change the IDs for the run user to be different than the build user, what that could mean for particular like frameworks and runtimes. Like for example, Rails by default will like try to create a log directory and dump a bunch of logs in the like current directory that the process is started from. And so that would be the workspace in our case. And so you can configure it to not do that, but like if we were to change the ID and hence make that directory not writable for runtime processes, that would be a breaking change in some cases that users might be relying on. And we just don't necessarily know all the impacts that our users might experience. So it's worth considering. That's not what this RFC is asking for, but if we were to ever do that, it's worth considering the ramifications. All right. Moving on from that one, we've got a second RFC from Sam. This one specifically is asking about removing shell-specific interfaces. So we've got like a bunch of build packs that basically are run with direct equal to false in their process type tables. The reason for this in most cases is we have like shell environment variable interpolation that we're relying on in the start commands. It's pretty common across a bunch of our build packs for the start commands to include things like a port variable. Fortunately, upstream, Emily, I think you were the one who wrote the RFC for this. There's like a new form of the start command that we can specify where there's going to be like replacements for things like environment variables. And so there's no reason we couldn't switch to using that, in addition to switch to using execd instead of profiled. The reason we would care about doing this across all of our build packs is that when that RFC is fully implemented, the shell starting launcher process bits will be removed, and all of our build packs would break if they were still relying on that behavior. This again seems like a relatively straightforward request. I don't know about the Java build packs. I feel like they do a lot of profile D stuff, although I don't know if it's changed to execd recently.
We've already switched all of it to exec-d because we want to run on the tiny file system where there's no bash anyways. On the tiny stack. I think if there's any exceptions, it's like when we're running Catalina sh. Like right now, that is a shell process, and that will still require bash and be a shell process, which like put it in the format of a direct process, even if that direct process is invoking bash.
I think in the case of all the other build packs, I think this mostly impacts start commands and how they're specified. The exception, I think, of like Node Engine or a couple other build packs that maybe have a profile descript in them, but there's not very many. All right, assuming no questions on that, we have this RFC to convert Buildpack YAML support in PHP to environment variables. The team has recently decided that we're going to be picking up the PHP rewrite RFC pretty soon, like in the next short while. As part of that, one of the things we're going to try to do is modernize the Buildpack. And part of that modernization is to move off of Buildpack YAML and instead to environment variables for configurations. This RFC just kind of outlines what are the new environment variables that will be introduced for the Buildpack as part of that process, and how do they map onto the old buildpack.yaml file configuration options. So if you care about PHP, feel free to peruse this and provide some feedback. I'm not sure there's been a lot of feedback up to this point. Maybe a little bit from Sophie. All right. Next one up here is a proposal to alter the builder order. My understanding here was that the node build pack is a little bit too it's a little bit too open in terms of what it's actually going to detect on. I think in some cases it was detecting on types of applications that are kind of like hybrid applications, or applications where the user's intent was not to use the node build pack, but was to say use the Java build pack to have Java invoke some build process that built your node code. So the intent here, I think, is to move the node build pack lower in the order groupings. It looks like it's proposed to be almost the very last thing in there, which is just before procfile. I know that Frankie wanted to try this out on a bunch of our samples and some other apps we may have around, just to get an idea of how this might impact users. But I think that that's kind of the only thing that it was maybe blocked on. It was just some exploration. All right. And lastly here for outstanding RFCs, this is one to add support for the web server's language family build pack, which doesn't actually technically exist yet at this point, but is also another thing the team is going to be taking up very shortly to implement. And so part of this is not necessarily just including support for the existing Nginx, HTTPD, and static file build packs as a language family, but also allowing folks to use framework-derived static files like stuff that comes from Angular or React or Next.js, things that require a build process. The idea being the build pack will install Node, it will install all of your modules, it will then run your build process to create your static JavaScript front-end application. We'll then drop those files in the workspace, install a web server like Nginx, configure it to actually serve your files, and then build your image out. Ultimately, this means that your image should only ever have in it the static files themselves and the server. This way, you're not running a static application that has Node in it when you don't really need Node at all. I just posted this one yesterday, so feel free to take a look and provide any feedback. Yeah. Awesome. Quiet one today. Let's see. So that covers outstanding RFCs. I don't have anything here from the project update. Maybe we just go around the horn and folks who are actively working on stuff can give a minor update on what they're working on. So I'm just going to go to the first person in my list that I see, which is Sophie. You want to give an update on what's happening in your space?
Yeah, so right now I am working on an issue to support NuGet configurations via service bindings. A few months ago, packet support for service bindings was released, so we're going to leverage that so users can provide NuGet config files that way, rather than just directly providing them like in their application source code. I can link the issue in the document as well, if anybody's interested.
Awesome. Rob, you're next up. You want to give an update?
Tim pretty much covered it with the poetry stuff. I've been working pretty closely with Tim in all things Python, including poetry, and sort of generally going through some broken PRs, that kind of thing.
Awesome. I've been working on a bit on the Paketo dashboard. I'm adding some stuff that'll allow us to see basically the current status of actions running against open PRs, which hopefully will allow people to kind of quickly scan PRs that are open and see where they might want to go and kick one of the GitHub action jobs that maybe is stalled or failed. That's tending to be difficult, mostly because GitHub APIs around checks and statuses is actually pretty atrocious. So we'll see how much progress I can make on that front. I don't know if anyone else is actively working on anything. I'll leave the floor open here for a moment if folks want to chime in on what they're working on.
I think we mentioned this last week, but I know that Frankie, who's not here right now, is working on a similar issue to what I'm working on, but on the Node.js language family. So it's for npm-rc and yarn-rc files as well.
Awesome. Well, I don't see anything else in the topics here. I'll pause for just a moment if anyone is thinking of anything last minute they'd like to bring up. It doesn't sound like that's the case. All right, it was a short one today. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next week.